In a political era where there's a lot to be against, we need to know what we're for. So each of us voters, we have to have an actual platform and write down what we want to do if we want to have real change. Because I think the majority of Americans actually want the same thing, and it's not what's happening right now. So I have a 6-point plan, and they're somewhat in order, but they all kind of need to happen at the same time. We need a pro-democracy bill. We need foreign policy reform, tax reform, healthcare, education, and we need a triple bottom line infrastructure plan. So to go over those 6 points really quickly, the one that actually needs to happen first is the pro-democracy bill, otherwise known as the anti-corruption bill. And it's centered on 2 parts. One is campaign finance reform, and the second is voting reform. So campaign finance, we need to get the dark money out of politics. We have legalized bribery basically in this country right now, and that needs to change. What it seems to me is the most effective way to do this is we need an amendment to the Constitution that outlines more clearly the limits to the amount of money and regulating how campaigns can be financed. The other part of it is to allow for ranked choice voting and open primaries throughout the country in all types of elections. Because if you don't have that, then what we have now is going to continue to happen. You have 25% approval rating or less than that for Congress or for the Senate particularly. And so how is this happening? And this is why. So that's the first thing that needs to happen. Second thing that needs to happen is we need foreign policy reform. We need to go against the status quo of regime change wars, and if a country is not behaving by our economic policy, then they're more likely to be, we start on armed conflicts and we station our troops all across the country, all across the world. So this has got to change. And there's 4 points to this bill. It's about diplomacy, disarmament, immigration reform, and smart trade. So in diplomacy, that's got to be our first objective. And even if a country has a really bad actor, a bad leader who's doing terrible things to their people, our impulse cannot be, we need to start an armed conflict there and get that person out of power. Because actually, that's rarely the whole story. It's usually there's a little bit of manipulation that's happening on the part of the media and some of the warmongering politicians that want us to really feel empathy for the people so that we will support some armed conflict. And instead of that, what we're going to do is to first try to get to the bottom of it and see how our trade policies are affecting them. And sometimes the right answer will be sanctions, but seldom will it be sanctions, because sanctions, most people know, it ends up actually just hurting the people, the everyday people. It doesn't really hurt the leaders that much. So that's the point of emphasis first and foremost. Second of all, disarmament. Our goal has got to be, to stop throwing weapons into inflamed situations. So, the Syria-Turkey conflict right now, we pulled our troops out, which generally we got to start pulling our troops out of areas. But the ironic thing now is that we did it so ham-handedly that the Turks are just going in and decimating the Kurds. And the Kurds were fighting on our behalf. But the ironic thing is that Turkey's weapons are from us. And this is just one example, and this happens constantly. So our objective has got to be disarming the world. And we have the power to do that. The third part of the foreign policy reform is actually immigration, because our immigration policy is really out of line with our economic policy, and it's causing a lot of problems. So this has got to be, I actually agree with the idea of a merit-based immigration system, but it's not the type of merit that Republicans are often talking about, where they're talking about how much money you've got. That's not what it is. We need to evaluate our economic needs, and then we will prioritize folks who can fill those positions. And a lot of it is agricultural workers. So, as an example, so the point of emphasis there is aligning our immigration policy with our economic policy. And then the last part of it is smart trade, and these two kind of go hand in hand. But right now, it's like the trade wars with China are another thing. It's like, oh my God, the agricultural workers are really suffering. Well, the whole thing is that our USDA is set up to be, it's promoting globalization of our food system. We need localization of our food system. So there's really no reason to be trading with China anyways. But the USDA, it's like we're fighting against ourselves in this case. So if we promote regional food systems, which is part of the triple bottom line infrastructure bill I'll talk about in a minute, then this isn't even going to be a problem. We don't have to fart around with China and setting up all these really complicated trade deals, because there's not that much that we really need to trade. It could be a lot simpler. There's not a lot that we need to trade with other countries. We need to be a little bit more internal in our focus around our economy. Okay, so going on to taxation. Right now we have a horribly regressive tax code. And I hear people argue all the time, oh, well, no, we have a progressive tax code. Look at the way we tax income. We tax it progressively. Yeah, we tax income progressively, but wealth, it is what really matters. That's your buying power. That's your potential to be an economic actor and to support yourself. It's how much wealth holdings you have. And that's what we need to focus on. I've talked about my tax plan in previous videos, and the more I look into it, the better and the more confident I feel about it, where you're taxing wealth at a progressive graduated rate. The top rate would be 30% for those with wealth above 10, people's wealth above $10 billion would be taxed at 30%, and then you scale it down proportionally from there. And you can design this system to generate $6 trillion of revenue every single year. Right now we're just under $3 trillion. And well, just to put this in context, our budget deficit is $21 trillion, I think. So only if we spent no federal dollars on anything but making up the deficit and paying off the lenders, which we don't need to have a zero balance necessarily, but that would take 7 years to do that. So obviously we're not generating enough money to do this. So that's a really important tenet of this. Also, a part of this could be implementing there's a bunch of different strategies you can do. I mean, I would really hope to see that's the best way to do it. Everything else is kind of a shortcut and it's short-sighted as far as tax goes. But you could institute a value-added tax, and either way you do it, we would phase out the business tax. The business tax doesn't need to be there. You just are taxing each individual based on the total amount of wealth holdings that they have. So thirdly, healthcare. We need robust healthcare for every single individual in this country. And this is something that we do not skimp out on. We're generating all this revenue now. And one of the biggest things is it's going to make sure that every single person in this country has access to primary care, has access to catastrophic care. And you could debate what that actually entails, but I would say let's not skimp out on it. Why would we do that? The wealthiest country in the world, most powerful country in the world. Why do we treat our citizens like garbage, where 15% of us cannot access healthcare, and another 60% of us would go bankrupt if we had a catastrophe? So it's basically inhumane, and it's really easy to fix, actually. Education reform. So the money can also focus on ensuring that every single individual in this country has access to lifelong education. So this includes pre-care, pre-K, primary, secondary, college, and jobs retraining. And again, we can have a debate on what's happening around the margins, and I know a lot of people are going to get really upset by changing the code, which we currently have, which localities are raising a lot of the tax money that will go then to fund the schools. I think that's an archaic system, and I understand the argument, though, that you want to maintain local autonomy as much as possible so that individual schools can make decisions that are right for them. And this wouldn't change this. All this is taking the federally collected tax money, where nobody is exempt from it. We're all buying in together on this. And it's giving it to individuals, and then those individuals then are empowered to make these local decisions that are going to affect their schools. But no longer will we have a poor neighborhood in Baltimore trying to fund an education system at the same time that the rich neighborhood in Baltimore. Obviously, the rich neighborhood in Baltimore, those kids are going to have a major head start over the other kids, and that's completely unjust. And we end up paying for it at the end of the day. The rich people in this country do pay when we have terrible education for a number of students, and then they have problems as they grow up and they can't participate nearly to the same degree. We pay for that in social services. So just keep that in mind. And then the last part of this is the Green New Deal. But I'm expanding. It's not just a Green New Deal, it's a triple bottom line New Deal. So, economy, ecology, society. We're considering all of these three things. The Green New Deal actually is a triple bottom line deal, but people are confused. They're like, wait, I thought this was about the ecology, but we're also talking about housing? That doesn't make any sense. Well, you can't do a true, equitable greening of our economy if you don't also concern yourself with the gross inequities that we have in access to services in this country. And, I've also made a lot of observations on our delivery of public goods and how inefficient it is. And a lot of it has to do with, it's an infrastructure problem. So we have social services in a big city, one of them's over on this side of the town and one of them's over on this side of the town. But if they were together in the same place, they would actually complement each other, and we would be able to save a lot of resources. It would be far more efficient if these were in the same place and they were in the center so that they're very accessible for everybody in a region. So the Green New Deal, or the triple bottom line New Deal, is focused on a few things. Connecting broadband. It's about solar, wind, and water, renewable sources of energy, so we don't have to go around in the Middle East and cause a bunch of problems, so that we ensure that we have oil coming in to fuel our military-industrial complex. We don't have to do that anymore. It's also about affordable housing. 75% of all housing that's been built in this country in the last 40 years is only affordable for about 20% of people. So that makes zero sense. The market is failing. We can do this publicly, and we would help a lot of people and also save a lot of money. And building retrofits to green these buildings. And this doesn't always have to be more expensive. In fact, it will save a lot of money. Here in Maine, in this house that I am in right now, this is such a wasteful house in the winter because all of the there's no ceiling of the top, so all of the air, the hot air that we heat, is just escaping right out. It's terribly inefficient, and we at the moment we can't really afford to do anything like this. So this is what the triple bottom line infrastructure bill would do. It would help individuals to retrofit their businesses and retrofit their homes so that they actually save a lot of money. And transportation upgrade. I've talked in previous videos about transportation reforms that I would do and a general strategy. So this could be something where, and the funding mechanisms, I would have to make a 5-hour-long video to talk about every detail of how we would fund these and how we would roll it out. But it just is to say for today that this is a much needed reform. There are some strategies that we know that they work, but they're happening in isolation. There's no general planning around this or macro level planning around this. So that's why something like this would be really important, a triple bottom line infrastructure bill. Okay, so these 6 policy tenets are how we can move forward and prosper, but it's going to be a battle, but I'm all in.